The water hits the financial district without warning. It is 2026, and you are watching a modern metropolis drown in real time. Sedans tumble like plastic toys beneath a violent wall of brown water. The screen fractures, bleeding into grainy combat footage from 1968. The exact same choking mud. The exact same devastation. But those mudslides erasing villages along the Ho Chi Minh Trail were not an act of nature. They were a classified payload. The sky was hacked. You brace for the next unpredictable hurricane season. You watch the news and blame the collapsing power grids on a shifting climate, but you are operating under a fatal delusion. The technology to steer superstorms and trigger localized floods is not some futuristic threat. It has been actively weaponized and evolving in the shadows for over 50 years. If you cannot recognize the thermodynamic signature of a manufactured storm, you are just a sitting duck in the next invisible war. We are pulling you directly into the command bunker where weather is targeted and fired like artillery. I am taking you to the front line of meteorological warfare, tracking storm cells like advancing enemy battalions. From the suffocating jungles of Vietnam to modern atmospheric hacking over major cities, we will expose the lethal physics of a weaponized climate. We are giving you the tactical optics to see exactly who is pulling the strings of the sky before the next storm washes you out. We are dropping low over the dense, sweltering canopy of the Laotian jungle. It is 1967. You are strapped inside a retrofitted military cargo plane, and the mechanical vibration rattles right through your teeth. The bay doors grind open, screaming against the wind. But we are not dropping high-explosive bombs. The payload specialist releases hundreds of small, smoking silver canisters straight into the throat of a gathering storm cloud. The trap is officially set. Down below, the dirt roads of the enemy supply lines are about to turn into a suffocating, impassable ocean of mud. To the tactical meteorologist staring at the radar screens, this is not a weather forecast. This is a kinetic strike. They track the squall line with hyper-focused tension, watching the atmospheric pressure drop in real time. Every millimeter of rainfall is a tactical victory. They are drowning an enemy army without firing a single conventional bullet. The protocol flashing across the command bunker is designated Operation Popeye. Launched in March 1967, this is a highly classified weather warfare initiative operating entirely in the shadows. The flights originate out of Udorn Royal Thai Air Force Base, strictly off the books. The military has realized that bullets and napalm are expensive and highly visible. But manipulating the fluid dynamics of the atmosphere, that is the ultimate, untraceable stealth weapon. The core objective is brutally simple, yet thermodynamically complex. They need to artificially extend the Southeast Asian monsoon season directly over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This sprawling network of dirt paths and makeshift bridges is the critical logistical artery for the North Vietnamese army. Cut the artery, and the enemy bleeds out. But instead of severing it with shrapnel, the meteorologists are engineering a sustained torrential deluge to wash the entire system off the map. The military designates this heavily contested operational area as Tiger Island. It is a vital, dense strip of land running straight through the borders of Laos and Cambodia. Millions of tons of weapons, food, and reinforcements are transported through this specific corridor. Striking it from the air with standard munitions is like swatting a swarm of bees with a hammer. The jungle simply swallows the craters. They need a weapon that seeps into the very soil itself, rotting it from within. By forcefully increasing the baseline rainfall, the military aims to push the Earth past its breaking point. They are softening road surfaces until they turn into liquid traps. They are triggering massive, unpredictable landslides that bury supply convoys alive. They are washing out vital river crossings in a matter of hours. The strategy is to fundamentally destroy the enemy logistics network through sheer, unadulterated mud, replacing explosive shockwaves with geographic collapse. The meteorologist in the bunker watches the weather radar bloom into a violent, hostile green. This is not just rain. It is an engineered atmospheric blockade. The enemy below is looking up at the sky, cursing their terrible luck, completely unaware that the storm was manufactured in a laboratory. The sheer asymmetric power of this tactic rewrites the rules of engagement. You cannot shoot down a monsoon. You cannot take cover from the total saturation of the ground beneath your boots. This initial, desperate experiment in the Laotian jungle opens a terrifying Pandora's box. The command structure quickly realizes the apocalyptic potential of meteorological warfare. If you can control the moisture in a single storm cell over a supply route, you can eventually scale that thermodynamic control. The line between a natural disaster and a military strike begins to blur, fading into the noise of statistical probability. The atmosphere itself becomes the ultimate high ground. But hiding a manufactured monsoon requires absolute operational silence. The paper trail for Operation Popeye is buried under layers of top-secret clearance. The pilots flying the seeding missions do not wear standard insignias. The weather data is classified higher than nuclear deployment codes. Because if the international community discovers that the United States is weaponizing the global climate system, it will trigger an immediate retaliatory arms race for the stratosphere. The true genius of the operation lies in its absolute invisibility. When a bridge collapses under the weight of a flash flood, no one investigates it as a crime scene. There is no shrapnel to recover, no ballistic trajectory to trace back to a firing solution. The evidence simply evaporates into the humidity or washes downstream. The victims are left drowning in the mud, entirely convinced that the universe has simply turned against them. That is the chilling beauty of the algorithm. The tactical meteorologist signs off on the final weather report for the sector. The mission is a complete, devastating success. The Ho Chi Minh Trail is effectively paralyzed by a localized flood of biblical proportions. The war correspondents on the ground report terrible weather, completely oblivious to the kinetic strike that just occurred above their heads. The military has successfully hacked the planet's operating system, achieving the holy grail of global combat operations. This brings us to the most dangerous concept in modern warfare, a doctrine born in the monsoon rains of 1967, the concept of plausible deniability. If you possess the technology to engineer a catastrophic storm, how do you deploy it without triggering a world war? The answer is terrifyingly simple. How do you destroy a rival nation's critical infrastructure, drown their cities, paralyze their economy, and still manage to blame it entirely on God? You ask how you blame a weapon of mass destruction on God. You look inside the bomb bay. The answer is not a nuclear warhead or a biological agent. The audacity of Operation Popeye relies entirely on a deceptive, microscopic payload. We are stepping away from the strategic maps and descending straight into the dirt. A forward field laboratory tent flaps violently in the monsoon wind. Inside this canvas bunker, the air smells of ozone and harsh chemicals. A technician in rolled-up sleeves is hastily packing artillery shells with a fine, pale yellow powder. To the atmospheric physicist observing this raw assembly line, this powder is not just a chemical. It is a thermodynamic trigger, a hack designed to violently crash the local climate system and drown the enemy. The threat is growing right now, packed tightly into these brass casings. The question demands an immediate answer. How does a tiny speck of metal force the sky to bleed water? Nature has her own massive, slow-moving machinery for rain. We are bypassing that machinery. We are slipping a skeleton key directly into the storm's ignition, forcing an unnatural, immediate deluge. The weapon of choice is a substance called silver iodide. This is a highly photosensitive inorganic compound. To the naked eye, it looks like innocuous yellow dust, but zoom in to the microscopic level, and its true lethality is revealed. Its atomic arrangement is a nearly perfect, flawless mimic of naturally occurring ice. This mimicry is a molecular Trojan horse. The atmosphere is a highly pressurized, volatile battlefield. Clouds hold billions of tons of suspended moisture, waiting for the exact right thermal conditions to fall. Silver iodide provides those conditions instantly, tricking the vapor into recognizing it as a freezing point. It is a forced, rapid surrender of the sky to human engineering. The deployment protocol is brutally efficient and highly dangerous. The payload must be injected directly into a supercooled cloud layer at an altitude of exactly 20,000 feet. At this height, the water vapor is sub-zero, but lacks the particulate matter needed to crystallize. The physicist watches the turbulent radar, anticipating the exact, violent moment of collision. When the flare ignites inside the storm cell, the reaction is instantaneous and catastrophic. Silver iodide acts as a condensation nucleus. The math is staggering. A single gram of this compound will generate 10 to the 14th power microscopic ice crystals in a matter of seconds. It is a biological-style infection, but written entirely in the language of thermodynamics. We are forcefully breaking the thermodynamic bottleneck of the cloud. Normally, a storm releases its moisture gradually, governed by atmospheric pressure and natural cooling. We are aggressively overriding those safety valves. The silver iodide forces an immediate, violent phase change across the entire massive cloud structure. The suspended water droplets violently latch onto the crystalline structure of the powder. They freeze instantly. They collide, merging rapidly and gaining immense physical mass. Gravity abruptly takes over. What was once harmless drifting vapor plummets to the earth as concentrated, torrential rain. The sky is literally falling, dropping like frozen stones over the target zone. This is not a controlled laboratory experiment. It is a live fire exercise over hostile territory. The physicist feels the cold thrill of unleashing thermodynamic forces far too vast to entirely predict or control. Once the chain reaction starts, there is absolutely no abort code. The atmosphere takes the initial kinetic energy and multiplies it tenfold, ravaging the landscape. The operational scale of this weather hack is staggering. The 54th Weather Reconnaissance Squadron was tasked with carrying out this invisible bombardment. During the highly classified campaign, these pilots flew over 2,600 individual seeding sorties. Every single flight was a calculated kinetic strike against the fragile equilibrium of the monsoon season. They were heavily saturating the upper atmosphere with an engineered trigger. Over 47,000 individual flare units were fired directly into the volatile storm systems above the jungle. The logistics of this operation required loading tens of thousands of chemical triggers, with the crew knowing each one was designed to unleash millions of gallons of water on the enemy below. The pale yellow powder in the flapping field tent is now a weaponized, advancing storm front. The payload has been successfully delivered, and the terrifying physics are taking over. The clouds are darkening rapidly, heavy with an artificial burden. The radar screen blips with a massive engineered squall line. The real horror is no longer in the sky. It is about to hit the ground. The real horror is no longer in the sky. It hits the jungle canopy with the deafening roar of continuous machine gun fire. Down here on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the air is thick with the smell of crushed broad leaves and panic. You are standing ankle-deep in a nightmare. The microscopic chemical reaction we just witnessed in the stratosphere has materialized into a macroscopic catastrophe. The rain is blinding. It is a relentless physical assault tearing the earth apart. A convoy of heavy supply trucks is hopelessly paralyzed ahead of you. They are buried up to their axles in thick, dark red laterite mud. Desperate soldiers are screaming over the roar of the downpour, fighting to winch their vehicles out of the sinking earth. But the ground is actively swallowing them. Exhaustion is setting in. The soil itself has been weaponized against them. This is not a natural storm. This is a kinetic strike disguised as a weather anomaly. Look closer at the ground under your boots. The true genius of this classified weapon is not the rain itself. The military did not just artificially summon water from the clouds. They fundamentally altered the physical state of the terrain. This is the multiplier effect in action. Water is merely the delivery mechanism. The real target is the structural integrity of the earth. They engineered a way to dissolve the enemy's foundation right out from under them. Every type of soil has a specific breaking point. Geologists call it the plastic limit. It is the exact threshold of moisture where solid, compacted dirt suddenly loses its shear strength and transitions into a semi-liquid state. The planners behind Operation Popeye calculated this threshold with brutal mathematical precision. They knew exactly how much extra water was required to push the dirt roads of the supply routes past their physical breaking point. The payload of silver iodide shattered the thermodynamic bottleneck above. As a direct result, rainfall in these artificially seeded zones spiked by an estimated 30%. That 30% was the fatal margin. It was the exact volume of water needed to overwhelm the soil's natural drainage capacity. The compacted dirt roads instantly liquefied. They stopped being a transportation network and immediately transformed into an impassable, liquid quagmire. The devastation scales up rapidly. To your right, the swollen riverbanks violently give way under the sheer, unnatural volume of water. The muddy rapids surge forward, indiscriminately sweeping hundreds of tons of crucial munitions and supplies into the churning brown foam. You are watching an entire logistical artery bleed out into the jungle. No explosives were dropped here. No artillery craters dot the landscape. Yet, the destruction is absolute and total. Nature operates on a schedule, but the military hacked the calendar. The seasonal monsoon is a known variable, something armies have navigated for centuries. But Operation Popeye aggressively rewrote the seasonal timeline. By continuously feeding the storm systems with chemical catalysts, the operation successfully extended the monsoon season over the target area by an average of 30 to 45 days. A month and a half of relentless, unnatural flooding. Think about the tactical reality of those extra 30 to 45 days. The enemy had planned for the dry season to arrive. They had timed their supply runs, their troop movements, their entire survival strategy around the natural retreat of the rains. We denied them that relief. We trapped them in an endless, suffocating loop of drowning infrastructure. The sky became a broken faucet that the Pentagon simply refused to turn off. The strategic math of this invisible bombardment was brutally effective. The U.S. military meticulously tracked the results of their man-made catastrophe. They calculated that the engineered mud effectively reduced enemy traffic along the trail by over 50% during these extended wet periods. Over half of the enemy's logistical capacity was completely paralyzed. We severed their supply lines without ever putting a single infantryman in the direct line of fire. This is the terrifying reality of meteorological warfare. When a bridge is bombed, you can rebuild it. When a convoy is ambushed, you can reroute the next one. But how do you fight the mud? How do you outmaneuver an environment that is actively dissolving beneath your tires? There is no flanking maneuver against a flash flood. There is no counterattack against a saturated water table. The environment itself becomes the ultimate, inescapable cage. The perfection of this weapon lies in its complete lack of a signature. To the soldiers drowning in the laterite sludge, it just looked like a bad year, a historically brutal storm season. The ultimate camouflage for a weapon of mass disruption is the weather itself. We engineered a disaster and let God take the blame. It is the purest form of plausible deniability ever achieved on a modern battlefield, buried deep in the classified archives. The men executing this mission understood exactly what they were doing. The official motto of the 54th Weather Reconnaissance Squadron executing the mission was dark, cynical, and surgically precise. Make mud, not war. They were not dropping high explosives. They were dropping state changes. They traded shrapnel for sheer, unadulterated physics, and in the process, they permanently rewrote the rules of military engagement. This was 1967. We were manipulating the monsoon with analog flight instruments and flares dropped out of retrofitted cargo planes. The success on the Ho Chi Minh Trail proved that the atmosphere is an incredibly vulnerable fluid dynamic system. It proved that kinetic hacking of the sky is not only possible, it is tactically devastating. We opened a Pandora's box of meteorological manipulation that can never be closed again. The mud that swallowed those supply trucks was just the proof of concept. The 50% reduction in traffic was the data point that validated an entirely new paradigm of warfare. Once the military brass realized they could successfully weaponize the rain, the ambition shifted. If you can flood a jungled trail in Laos, what stops you from steering a hurricane into a hostile naval fleet? What stops you from starving a nation by turning off their rain? But playing God with the Earth's life support system carries a terrifying risk. The sheer scale of the disruption we caused on the ground could not stay hidden in the clouds forever. The physical evidence was washing down the mountainsides, and the geopolitical shockwaves were about to hit the mainland. A secret this massive, this fundamentally disruptive to the balance of the planet, was bound to breach containment. The fallout was just beginning. The fallout hits like a shockwave, but not in the jungle. It strikes a dim, wood-paneled hearing room in Washington, D.C., 1974. Flashbulbs pop like artillery fire. Senators grip heavily redacted black folders, their knuckles white. The tactical meteorologist, watching from the gallery, feels the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. This is the front line of a new kind of panic. A secret this massive, a man-made monsoon engineered in the shadows, has finally breached containment. I have tracked the signatures of weapons across the globe, and I can tell you this. You cannot hide a manufactured weather front from the rest of the world forever. The laws of thermodynamics demand a paper trail. The military built a godlike apparatus to drown an enemy, operating under a veil of absolute silence. But the silence shatters. The hook is simple and terrifying. How do you keep a weaponized storm system classified when its devastation washes across international borders? The answer is you do not. The existence of Operation Popeye remained locked in the darkest vaults of the Pentagon until 1971. Then, the system cracked. A devastating leak to the press detonated across the front pages. The government is forced into a brutal corner, trapped by their own telemetry data. They must publicly acknowledge a terrifying reality. They are actively manipulating the weather over foreign soil. The plausible deniability we relied on is violently stripped away. Through the eyes of the tactical meteorologist in that hearing room, the testimony sounds less like a debriefing and more like a confession to playing God. The politicians reading the reports suddenly realize the Pandora's box they authorized. If we can drown the Ho Chi Minh Trail, what stops Moscow from freezing the eastern seaboard? The room smells of stale sweat and sudden realization. The weapon we deployed is a boomerang, and it is already flying back toward our own fragile infrastructure. The international outrage is immediate and entirely justified. It hits the diplomatic channels like a Category 5 hurricane. The global intelligence community looks at the data from Southeast Asia and panics. The fear driving this uproar is not just about the mud in Laos. It is the realization that localized weather warfare can trigger uncontrollable, cascading ecological disasters globally. You pull a thread in the troposphere over Asia, and you unravel the agricultural stability of Europe. We are standing on the precipice of an entirely new arms race, one where the ammunition is the atmosphere itself. As a frontline observer, I see the immediate shift in military doctrine. The traditional battlefield vanishes. The sky above every capital city is now a potential strike zone. The panic in Washington is a mirror reflecting the terror in every global command center. If a single squadron can alter the climate, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction needs a complete rewrite. This escalating dread forces a desperate diplomatic ceasefire. By 1977, the geopolitical terror culminates in the United Nations. The global superpowers scramble to hit the kill switch on meteorological warfare, drafting the Environmental Modification Convention, or ENMOD. It is a desperate attempt to patch the cracked foundation of reality. The treaty is born not out of environmentalism, but out of pure, unadulterated survival instinct. The language of the ENMOD treaty is a stark admission of the apocalypse we narrowly avoided. It explicitly prohibits the military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques. The diplomats are trying to outlaw the very physics we just weaponized. The treaty bans any engineered weather event having widespread, long-lasting, or severe effects. On paper, it fundamentally outlaws the use of the weather as a kinetic weapon, slamming the door on atmospheric manipulation. Knows the truth. ENMOD creates a knows the truth. ENMOD creates a comfortable illusion for the civilian population. You read the headlines and believe the sky is safe again. But I see the bureaucratic loophole hiding in plain sight. The convention bans hostile military use, but it leaves the door wide open for civilian research. We did not destroy the weapon. We simply rebranded its deployment. The moment the ink dries in 1977, the true atmospheric Cold War begins. The operations vanish from the military bases and reappear in the sterile laboratories of civilian agencies. The funding streams go black. The technology that flooded the jungle does not stop evolving. It goes underground. As I track the deployment of new radar arrays and massive chemical seeding budgets, the terrifying reality becomes clear. The ban just forced the arms race into the shadows. We trade the loud, messy combat drops of cargo planes for the silent precision of high-frequency energy and automated drones. The front line is no longer a jungle trail. It is the upper stratosphere. The rules of engagement shift to absolute stealth. If a hostile nation triggers a catastrophic drought in your agricultural heartland today, they will not declare war. They will simply send their condolences for your tragic, unforeseen climate anomaly. The perfect crime requires no fingerprints. The tactical meteorologist sitting in the bunker today looks back at those black and white photos from the 1974 hearings with grim recognition. Those senators thought they were stopping a localized threat. They had no idea they were just establishing the baseline for a global atmospheric hostage situation. The technology born in Operation Popeye has mutated. The crude silver iodide flares are now part of a planetary-scale machinery operating right above your head. We are locked in a silent war for the very thermodynamic engine of the planet. The legislation that was supposed to protect you is fundamentally obsolete. By labeling massive weather alteration programs as agricultural development or climate mitigation, superpowers can now engineer continental-scale fronts with total impunity. The guardrails have collapsed. The sky is no longer a shared natural resource. It is a highly contested, weaponized grid, just waiting for the next command sequence. The command sequence is already executing, but the launch codes are buried in agricultural budgets. I step into a cutting-edge control room in Beijing, year 2026. The sterile silence is broken only by the hum of massive server racks. We are not looking at troop movements. The glowing LED screens covering the walls display real-time atmospheric water vapor maps across the entire continent of Asia. This is the front line of the modern water war, and the scale is staggering. The treaty banned hostile weather modification, but left a loophole massive enough to drive a fleet of bombers through. If you call it civilian infrastructure, you can engineer a storm the size of a country. The atmospheric physicist tracking these systems sees the terrifying reality. These are not isolated agricultural experiments. We are witnessing the industrialization of the monsoon. The sky is being harvested, and the collateral damage is entirely off the books. The data cascading across the screens details China's Sky River project. This is currently the largest cloud seeding operation in human history. The stated objective sounds purely humanitarian: intercept atmospheric moisture drifting over the Tibetan Plateau and forcefully redirect it to precipitate over the arid northern regions of the country. But looking at the radar, I see a highly weaponized logistics network. We have moved far beyond retrofitted cargo planes dropping flares over a jungle canopy. Down on the frozen tundra, tens of thousands of ground-based solid fuel-burning chambers are positioned in a sprawling, autonomous grid. When the atmospheric conditions align, these autonomous nodes ignite simultaneously. They release massive, calculated plumes of silver iodide directly into the steep mountain updrafts. The sheer geographical footprint of this combustion network shatters any illusion of localized weather control. These burning chambers are distributed across a staggering 5.2 million square miles. To put that into perspective, this operational theater is larger than the entire country of India. The atmospheric physicist watches the updrafts carry the chemical payload into the stratosphere. We are looking at Operation Popeye, scaled up to a continental industrial complex. Once that silver iodide hits the supercooled water vapor, the thermodynamic chain reaction is immediate and violent. The moisture is forced to condense and fall exactly where the algorithm dictates. But the atmosphere is a closed, fluid, dynamic system. Water is not created here. It is simply intercepted and relocated. This brings us to the terrifying kinetic reality of macroscopic weather engineering. You cannot flood one region without starving another of its natural rainfall. By forcefully redirecting millions of tons of atmospheric moisture, these megaprojects create a devastating zero-sum game in the sky. Stealing rain for one specific region actively engineers a severe, prolonged drought in neighboring countries situated downstream. The physicist stares at the empty radar pockets expanding over the borders. This is a stealth siege. A nation can literally choke the water supply of a geopolitical rival without ever crossing their physical borders. The realization hits with the force of a kinetic strike. Modern nations are already stealing each other's water right out of the sky, masking acts of geopolitical aggression as routine agricultural maintenance. If this terrifying scale of atmospheric hacking blows your mind too, hit the like button. To make sure you do not miss the solution to this escalating climate mystery, subscribe to the channel right now, and let me know in the comments, do you think any treaty can stop this? The silence of this new warfare is its most lethal characteristic. When a river runs dry and crops wither into dust, the victim nation blames global warming or bad luck. They appeal for international aid, entirely unaware that their drought was chemically engineered by a neighboring superpower months in advance. The atmospheric physicist understands the brutal calculus on the screen. The water vapor map is a battlefield, and the downwind nations are already sustaining heavy casualties. We are standing at ground zero of a resource war where the ammunition is invisible. Every solid fuel chamber burning on the Tibetan Plateau is a tactical strike against the natural hydrological cycle. The radar blips represent billions of gallons of water being forcefully diverted from historical flight paths. It is a terrifying display of absolute dominance over the fundamental elements of human survival. The genius of this strategy lies in its absolute plausible deniability. You cannot put a storm cloud on trial at The Hague. You cannot definitively prove that a prolonged dry season was triggered by a specific array of silver iodide burners located 1,000 miles away. The atmospheric physicist knows that the margin of error in global weather models provides the perfect alibi. The weaponization of the atmosphere is shielded by the inherent chaos of the climate itself. The control room in Beijing hums with quiet efficiency, entirely disconnected from the geopolitical panic it is quietly generating. The operators monitor the updraft vectors, adjusting the burn rates of the chambers with the clinical detachment of artillery officers calibrating a firing solution. The lines on the graph are not just data points. They are the lifeblood of entire downstream economies being surgically diverted into holding reservoirs. The robbery is perfectly legal. This is the fatal flaw of the 1977 ENMOD Convention laid bare. By focusing on explosive, immediate destruction, the politicians completely missed the slow, structural violence of civilian weather modification. The atmospheric arms race did not end. It merely changed its uniform. Now, every superpower with a water deficit is scrambling to build their own sky rivers, rushing to claim their share of the atmospheric moisture before their neighbors bleed the clouds dry. As the global temperature rises, and fresh water becomes the most valuable commodity on the planet, the incentive to hack the monsoon becomes irresistible. We are hurtling toward a cascading ecological collapse, driven not by accident, but by competitive engineering. The physicist watches the red zones on the LED screen expand, recognizing the terminal trajectory. When multiple nations begin indiscriminately pulling the levers of the global climate, the fluid dynamic system will break. The chemical seeding of the Tibetan Plateau is just the overt face of this new Cold War. While autonomous burners flood the lower atmosphere with silver iodide, an even more terrifying capability is being tested in the extreme altitudes of the ionosphere. The war for the sky is about to shift from chemical logistics to the invisible, devastating power of directed energy. We are moving from forcing the rain to actively steering the jet stream itself. The real storm is just beginning. The chemical seeding over the Tibetan Plateau is brute force. It is the atmospheric equivalent of trench warfare. But the real front line has already moved beyond flares and silver iodide. To find the bleeding edge of meteorological combat, you have to leave the smog of industrial Asia and step onto the frozen, desolate tundra of Gakona, Alaska. Here, the weapon is entirely invisible. Through the eyes of the tactical meteorologist on the ground, this facility looks like a metallic forest. A sprawling grid of 180 silver antennas points directly upward, aimed like artillery at the edge of space. Suddenly, the low, bone-rattling hum of 3.6 megawatts of radio frequency energy pulses into the sky. They are not waiting for clouds. They are boiling the atmosphere from the ground. This is the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, known to the world as HAARP. Officially, it is an observatory. Tactically, it is an ionospheric heater capable of transmitting millions of watts of high-frequency radio waves directly into the upper atmosphere. It is the ultimate invisible hand. You do not need a fleet of cargo planes to change the weather if you can turn the sky itself into a targeted microwave oven. The operator watches the telemetry screens in the bunker glow with sudden thermal spikes. By focusing this immense energy, scientists can artificially heat specific, isolated patches of the ionosphere. Within seconds, the plasma, suspended hundreds of miles above your head, is superheated to temperatures exceeding 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. This sudden, violent injection of thermal energy triggers an immediate physical reaction. The meteorologist tracks the anomaly on the radar. The superheated, localized patch of the ionosphere violently expands and bulges outward into the vacuum of space. It is like detonating a thermal depth charge in the upper atmosphere. And, just like a depth charge, the blast wave does not stay contained. The shock ripples downward. This artificial bulge creates a massive thermodynamic displacement. The expanding ionosphere alters the delicate atmospheric pressure gradients resting directly below it. This is the critical kill chain. By manipulating these stratospheric pressure domes, you are no longer just making it rain over a localized area. You are subtly influencing the path of the jet stream itself. You are grabbing the steering wheel of the global climate. The jet stream is the planetary conveyor belt that dictates whether your city experiences a mild winter or a catastrophic blizzard. It is a river of high-velocity air roaring at hundreds of miles per hour. Pushing it naturally requires the energy of an ocean. But HAARP proves that with precisely targeted radio frequencies, you can nudge this planetary giant off its natural course. It is the ultimate application of leverage. The meteorologist knows you do not need to fight the entire hurricane. You just need to shift the high-pressure ridge that guides it. A minute thermal adjustment over the Alaskan Arctic propagates downward, creating a cascading domino effect thousands of miles away. A slight nudge in the ionosphere translates into a massive, kinetic weather event on the surface. While HAARP operates entirely in the open, officially classified as a civilian research facility, its kinetic potential is undeniable. The ability to nudge high-altitude wind currents means holding the power to steer macroscopic weather systems across the entire globe. It is the perfect stealth weapon. There are no bombers, no chemical signatures in the soil, and absolutely no warning sirens when the radio waves hit. If a shadow agency uses this technology to lock a high-pressure dome over the American Midwest, the resulting drought would cripple global food supplies, and no one would fire a single shot. The tactical meteorologist stares at the readouts, realizing the terrifying beauty of this warfare. The destruction is absolute, yet the plausible deniability remains perfectly intact. You just blame a historically bad season. And the United States is not alone on this invisible battlefield. Deep in the Russian wilderness, the Sura ionospheric heating facility pulses with its own megawatts of directed energy, probing the exact same atmospheric vulnerabilities. It is a silent, high-stakes duel happening right above your head. Two superpowers locked in a cold war of radio frequencies, constantly testing the boundaries of the planet's atmospheric shield. We have crossed a terrifying threshold. We are no longer waiting for the weather to happen, we are broadcasting it. But manipulating the jet stream is only half the equation. The true nightmare scenario emerges when you combine this thermodynamic steering with the colossal rivers of moisture already circling the globe. When you realize that the atmosphere is literally overflowing with unguided aquatic missiles. The antennas in Alaska fall silent, but the thermal scar in the ionosphere remains, already altering the wind currents far below. The meteorologist packs up the gear, the cold wind biting through their jacket. They know the next target is not a jungled trail in Vietnam. It is a modern grid. Because if you can steer the jet stream, you can steer an ocean in the sky directly into a densely populated, completely oblivious city. If you can steer the jet stream, you can steer an ocean in the sky directly into a densely populated, completely oblivious city. The satellite imagery flashes across the monitors in a rapid-fire montage. The atmospheric physicist tracks the blinding red radar returns pushing violently across the Pacific. This is not a simulation. This is a live feed of the front line, and the ammunition is already in the air. We are looking at an atmospheric river. It is a continuous ribbon of condensed water vapor over 2,000 miles long, slamming directly into the United States West Coast. The physicist watches the telemetry, feeling the cold thrill of tracking thermodynamic forces too vast to entirely control. The threat here is the weaponized butterfly effect. A fractional temperature shift over the ocean equals catastrophic flooding on land. These aerial currents transport incomprehensible amounts of water vapor entirely outside the tropics. To understand the scale, consider a single, strong system. It carries up to 15 times the average flow of liquid water at the mouth of the Mississippi River. It is a literal fire hose of moisture, suspended in the troposphere, searching for a place to break. You have to view this not as a meteorological event, but as a kinetic payload. Millions of tons of water are accelerating toward the coastline. The physicist isolates the pressure ridges on the screen. If that fire hose hits an unpopulated mountain range, it is just rain. But if you can force it to stall over a concrete grid, you unleash a tactical strike capable of wiping out a regional economy in 48 hours. The bottleneck used to be precision. You could not risk steering a storm if you could not calculate the exact fallout. But by 2026, that barrier has been obliterated. Advanced artificial intelligence neural networks now model global weather patterns with terrifying accuracy, predicting thermodynamic shifts weeks in advance. The computers do not just forecast the weather anymore. They calculate the ballistics. The algorithms scan the atmospheric river, analyzing billions of data points to find the exact structural weakness. The physicist knows what the machine is hunting for. It is looking for the fulcrum. That single microscopic patch of the Pacific atmosphere where a sudden burst of heat or a chemical catalyst will trigger a cascading reaction. The artificial intelligence provides the exact coordinates for the kill shot. This is where the directed energy arrays come online. If an actor uses an ionospheric heater to blast a targeted radio frequency into the upper atmosphere, they can artificially alter the underlying pressure system. They only need to shift the steering winds by a fraction of a degree. You apply the thermal nudge thousands of miles offshore, completely out of sight, and let the planetary rotation do the rest of the heavy lifting. That fraction of a degree over the open ocean translates into a massive geographical shift on the ground. The physicist watches the projected flight path of the storm system physically bend on the monitor. A 200-mile southward trajectory correction. The atmospheric river is no longer meandering. It has been locked onto a heavily populated urban center. The radar feed pulses in hostile bleeding red. The atmospheric physicist leans over the console, the glow of the monitors illuminating the sheer audacity of the math. There are no launch codes, no ICBMs breaking the atmosphere. Just an invisible pulse of radio wave energy causing a slight atmospheric expansion. Yet the resulting kinetic energy delivery rivals a nuclear detonation, unfolding in slow motion over several days. When that steered river makes landfall, the devastation is absolute. The infrastructure of a modern city is completely overwhelmed. Storm drains geyser into the streets. Power grids short out under the rising water, and critical supply chains instantly snap. We saw the mud swallow the Ho Chi Minh Trail in 1967. Now, that same engineered liquefaction threatens concrete foundations, dragging whole neighborhoods into the abyss. This execution creates the perfect crime. You paralyze an adversary's economy, wipe out their agricultural yield, and decimate their industrial base. And you achieve all of this while remaining entirely invisible. Because when the water recedes and the body bags are counted, the targeted nation does not declare war. The global media simply reports it as a tragic, naturally occurring extreme weather event driven by climate change. The plausible deniability is flawless. There is no radiation signature to track, no shrapnel to analyze, and no unexploded ordnance to trace back to a manufacturing plant. The weapon destroys the evidence as it operates. The physicist understands the brutal genius of this strategy. You are drowning your enemy, and they are too blind to even know they are under attack. Even if an allied intelligence agency detects the ionospheric heating anomaly, proving intent is scientifically and legally impossible. You cannot definitively separate the artificial thermal nudge from the chaotic background noise of a warming planet. The target nation is left bleeding out, forced to divert billions of dollars into disaster recovery instead of defense spending. A bloodless coup executed by barometric pressure. This is the grim reality of the new arms race. We are no longer fighting over borders or oil fields. We are fighting over the troposphere. Every major storm system forming over the ocean is now subjected to intense military scrutiny. The physicist monitors the data streams, acutely aware that an adversary's artificial intelligence is likely running the exact same offensive models on our own coastal vulnerabilities at this very second. The satellite feed refreshes, locking onto a new cluster of deep convection forming off the coast. The red zones expand, hungry and organized. The atmospheric physicist stares at the incoming trajectory, the cold realizations settling in the silent control room. The next time you see a historic weather warning flash across your phone, understand this: you might not be looking at a forecast. You might be looking at a crosshair. The water is finally receding, leaving behind a thick, toxic sludge of mud and ruined infrastructure. The emergency sirens have bled out into a heavy, exhausted silence. Walking through these flooded streets, you see the civilian casualties of a war that was never officially declared. The storm has passed, and we survived the initial strike. But the architecture of our reality has fundamentally fractured. The sky above is no longer a protective canopy. It is an empty, loaded chamber. Back in the underground command bunkers, the radar screens fade to black, and the tactical meteorologists power down their terminal feeds. Their shift is over. They have tracked the atmospheric rivers, measured the barometric anomalies, and packed away their models. But their data leaves us standing in the wreckage of a shattered illusion. We started this journey looking at black and white footage of a jungle in 1967, believing weather warfare was a relic of the past. We thought the international community had drawn a hard red line. The United Nations Environmental Modification Convention of 1977 was supposed to be our shield, outlawing the hostile use of environmental modification techniques. But the legacy of Operation Popeye proves a much darker axiom of human nature. When a superpower develops the technology to weaponize the physical world, treaties do not stop the machinery. They simply force the research underground. Today, we are staring down a timeline of escalating global water scarcities and brutal economic competition. The temptation to deploy stealth meteorological warfare grows exponentially with every failing harvest and every dried reservoir. We have watched modern nations scale up cloud seeding into continental industrial complexes, framing the theft of atmospheric moisture as routine agricultural development. The tactical drowning of an enemy supply line has evolved into geopolitical survival. The most terrifying victory of this new Cold War is the absolute perfection of its camouflage. We are actively entering an era where distinguishing between a naturally occurring climate disaster and a targeted kinetic strike is scientifically impossible for the average citizen. You cannot dust a hurricane for fingerprints. You cannot trace a fatal shift in the jet stream back to an ionospheric heater operating behind classified fences in the frozen tundra. The perfect crime is systemic. This is the point of no return. By injecting silver iodide into supercooled clouds and firing millions of watts of radio frequency energy into the ionosphere, we have fundamentally hacked the operating system of the planet. We stripped the chaotic innocence from the biosphere and replaced it with an algorithm. And like any deeply embedded legacy code, we cannot simply hit undo. The fluid dynamic system of our atmosphere is permanently altered, responsive to commands we cannot hear. I have stood in these disaster zones, watching recovery crews pull debris from the wreckage of a 100-year flood that arrived exactly when an adversary needed it to. The silence from the geopolitical stage is deafening, because every major player is running the same offensive simulations. If you accuse a rival of steering a monsoon, you admit that your own skies are entirely vulnerable. So, the governments issue disaster relief funds, and the silent war grinds on without a single gunshot. You must understand that the theater of combat has expanded directly over your home. The infrastructure that keeps your city alive, the power grids, the supply chains, the transportation networks, was built for a predictable, natural climate model that simply no longer exists. When an engineered atmospheric river carrying 15 times the volume of the Mississippi River is redirected toward a coastal vulnerability, there is no bunker deep enough. You are standing on the front lines. We can no longer afford the comfort of our previous ignorance. Believing that every catastrophic drought or biblical flood is just the random fury of an angry planet is a psychological defense mechanism. It is easier to blame the cosmos than to accept that human beings are actively weaponizing the troposphere. But survival in this new century demands a cold, uncompromising forensic lens. You have to look at the gathering storm clouds and ask, who benefits from the impending destruction? Out here, on the ground, the casualties of this invisible conflict are written into the mud and the ruined crops. The tactical strikes of the 21st century do not arrive with the roar of a jet engine. They arrive as a heavy, unseasonal downpour that washes away a nation's economic independence. The sky is no longer a neutral zone. It has been transformed into the ultimate high ground, a fluid battlefield where sovereign nations fight a continuous, silent war for absolute dominance. The terrifying genius of Operation Popeye was not just the manipulation of the monsoon. It was the realization that humanity's deepest instinct is to trust the sky. We are biologically wired to accept the weather as an undeniable truth, an act of God. By hacking that psychological vulnerability, military intelligence created a weapon that operates entirely in the blind spot of human perception. They stole the rain, and in doing so, they stole our fundamental trust in the natural world. If navigating this investigation has shattered your previous assumptions and given you the tactical optic to see the actual mechanics of the sky, hit the like button. That is our radar, confirming we are tracking the right targets in this continuous information war. And if you refuse to remain a blind casualty in a world of engineered storms, subscribe and join this ongoing reconnaissance. The archive is deep, the anomalies are multiplying, and we are just scratching the surface of this threat. We have crossed the threshold into a reality where the atmosphere itself is a fully operational kill zone. The dark clouds on the horizon are no longer mere meteorological probabilities. They are the thermodynamic shadows of geopolitical intent. You are now awake to the mechanics of the flood, knowing the next storm carries the distinct signature of human design. Keep your eyes on the barometric pressure and trust absolutely nothing. I am signing off.